Hi dear students, I hope you would be fine. Today we would be discussing an essay on criticism by Alexander Pope. Uh, First we would be looking the introduction of Alexander Pope, and later on we would be looking on the three parts of his essay which he has written in 1709. Alexander Pope is a very significant figure regarding poetry and neoclassicism and moreover with the criticism as well. So he has never visited a university. He has never been to the university, but what he has created, that is of more valuable in the history of English literature. He was ill. He was the patient of tuberculosis. He was short in height, but what he has created in the English literature, that is of great height. I am using the word his physical height as the lesser one, but his academic height as the higher one in the history of English literature. So my this comment or line uh, would reveal his dominance, his importance in the history of English literature as a poet and as a critic. Alexander Pope, a translator, poet, wit, means he was very witty one. He used to read, even whatever he write, he used to revise it. Then it was so precise that nothing, even a single comma, cannot be deleted from his poetry. So his poetry, his work is very witty one, and he was the amateur landscape gardeners, means he was having a garden where he used to sit and work, means uh, uh, his garden was mostly visited by the people. He was a satirist and he was born in London 1688. He contracted tuberculosis of the bone which he was young when he was young, which disfigured his spine and reportedly only allowed him to grow 4 feet 6 inches, means he was short in height. People grew up on his father's Pope grew up on his father's property at Binfield in the Windsor Forest, where he readily read avidly, means he read a lot and gained an appreciation for the natural world. Though he remained in ill health throughout his life, he was able to support himself as a translator and writer. But here I would be going to mention that he was having good contacts with the people who joined university, as on his being a Catholic, he was not allowed to join the university, and due to his physical disability he was not allowed to join the university, but he was having good contacts with the fellows who have been there in the university. So uh, on this contact with the university people or the university scholars, he has been indirectly learning what has been going on the universities at that time. Therefore, means he did not attend a university, but he learned what was going to be taught in the university. As a Catholic, at that time in the Britain, he was ineligible for patronage, means public office or a position at a university, so he could not get that. There are three parts of his essay on criticism, in which he has theorized that what is lacking in our criticism and what are the functions of criticism and how a critic should do his duties. Without criticism, without proper criticism, criticism is basically what value the fiction, which values the poetry. Without criticism, we cannot move forward. It is criticism which points the beauties. Even tracing some ugliness is the beauty. Criticism is not fault finding, it is more a beautification of an object or a piece. So Criticism is as more important as is the praise. Criticism creates the value. Criticisms gives the value to the things. So but when we are partial in our criticism, when we would be dull in our criticism, then definitely we would our fiction would not be of great value. So in part first, this line which I have taken, so vast is the art, so narrow human wit, this is his line. This is Pope's line. So in the part first, he says that art is a very vast one and our human wit is very narrow. So he says that there is the lacking of our critics, in means critics of the time, they are not having a true taste in criticism. And he says this is our, means a critic should have a true taste, and if he does not have this taste, then definitely our fiction is not going to be appraised, is not going to be evaluated, is not going to be enjoyed as well. Criticism makes the fiction to be enjoyed, makes the poetry to be enjoyed. It is with our judgments as our watches, none. This is the text from his essay. Go just a lie, yet each believes on his own. He says that every critic has his own judgments. We are not the part of universal judgment. We are not part of the parameters of universal criticism. Means we indulge ourselves in our own subjective realities, in our subjective truths, in our subjective understandings. So he says that a critic should have a true taste rather than personal tastes. And in this way, we are not going to, by developing our subjective taste, we are not serving the proper function of a true critic. Pope advocates knowing one's own artistic limits, means that, for example, he says that the critic should have a bare understanding of his limits. For example, if I am a critic of poetry, then I cannot be a critic of fiction. Means a critic cannot be, a very suitable critics of all domains of life, fiction, of life, of science, of painting, of poetry. So even a critic should be specialized in his own field of study. So therefore he advises that launch not beyond your depths, but be discreet and mark that point where sense and dullness meet. So I have, and you might have been seen, there are a lot of poets who even does not know the basic rhyme scheme, but they are doing poetry in different from the different aspects. Somewhere there seems to be Wordsworth, somewhere there seems to be Keats, somewhere there seems try to be the John Milton, but even they do not know the basic rhyme pattern of a poem. And similarly are the critics who, they consider themselves as a universal. I'm talking in the inverted commas. They consider themselves as the universal critics, means universal subject critics on every subject, on every theme. They consider themselves as an expert critic. While therefore he says that you can be a critic, but not the critic of every field of study. Therefore he says that launch not beyond your depth, but be discreet. He says that be limited, be specialized. It would be like that, as it is said that the master of all trades, of that none. Similarly, a critic who is going to infuse his head in every field of criticism, he would be a critic but of no value. He would be a critic, but he would not be having a taste. He would be a critic but not a genuine one of any field. He stresses that in order that the order in nature and the value of the work of ancients of Greece, but also states that not all good work can be explained by the rules. Means some beauties yet not percepts can declare, for there is a happiness as well as care. Uh, in this stance, in this understanding, he values the both. He says that we cannot set aside our the ancient greats of the Greece. At the same time, he says that we should not stick to our ancients. We should explore their beauties as well, but we should also appreciate the things which have been later on practiced. Means Homer was a great poet, but poetry has moved beyond the Homer as well. John Milton was the very great poet, but there have been the poetry, and even there have been the great poets after John Milton. So he says that we should not stick to one side, either to ancients or to the moderns. We should create a balance between these two. We should appreciate our ancients. We should appreciate the later ones who have been after our ancients. These have lines I have extracted, which are very, you know, very great ones from his own. This essay basically is not in prose form. This is in the form of prose poetry, poetic prose. So for your understanding, I have taken some extracts from his part 1. But you who speak to give and merit fame and justly bear a critic's noble name, be sure yourself and your own reach to know. These are basically, advice to the critics, that be sure, be yourself, and your own reach you have to know. Means you have to know your limits, how far your genius, taste and learning go. These things are important: your genius, taste and learning. And then he advises that no launch not beyond your depth, but be discreet and mark that point where sense and dullness meet. you know uh, Mark that point means do not be dull. Leave your dullness and make your sense wit. So all these are very, very judgmental, very deciding, very wise, very witty advice to the critics. Then in part 2 of this essay, this is a continuous essay. It's divided into 3 parts. In the part 2, he advises the critic that a little learning is a dangerous thing. This line has also been taken from his essay. So he says that a critic cannot be a critic of every field. Similarly, a critic without knowledge can be dangerous one. He may be a subjective, he may be satirist, but he cannot create a value. He might be a person who calls on subjective realities, but he cannot be a critic. Critic is beyond personal biases. So for that, he should have vast reading, vast experience, and he should have to think beyond his own subjective, subjective miserable biases, which he might have been developing in his mind. A great critic is the one who thinks beyond his own subjective biases. Means, for example, subjective biasness. For example, if I dislike Donald Trump, so it means that I'm not going to see the good works of Donald Trump. So I would be a critic, and I claim myself a critic. Then I would be a critic, but not a critic of great value. Therefore, he says that a critic with little learning is the dangerous one. So for that, to be a critic, for the qualification of a critic, one has to read a lot. People list the mistakes that the critics makes, as well as the defects in the poems that some critics short-sightedly praise. It's not only I was not only mentioning that critics is the one who always makes the faults, trace the faults from the poem. It means it is the function of the duty. It is the duty of the critics who just praise, who even he makes the poem more praiseworthy. Even he brings out the things to the readers which have not been have been the intention of the critic, artist as well, of the poet as well, of the fiction writer at that time. It is the duty of the function, duty and the function of the poet, critic, to bring the things, to make the things clear to the readers, so that they may appreciate the things, they may praise that fiction, that poetry, that poem, that novel. He advocates looking at the whole piece of work instead of being swayed by some of its sure or the faulty parts. He says that we should not be should not think look the things in the parts, but the whole. Means in any piece of poem there would be some faults, and there some would be strong points as well. So he says that we should not just focus on any of these, not only the faults, not only on the praises. We should look the fiction or the piece of work as a whole. In this way we would be having a justified our judgment. As men of breeding, sometimes men of wit, so to avoid the great errors must the lesson commit. He says that means, as if you have been reading different parts, means the poet like John Milton has having its own some faults as a poetry. Means even the great people commits mistakes, but the great people also have their some praiseworthy points as well. So a great critic should look both the ends. He advises against too much ornamentation in writing and against fancy style that communicates little of the merit. He says that the language should be simple one, it should not be too much ornamental. Even the language of a critic should not be so much fancy one. In his description of the versification means poetry, his lines enact the effect of clumsy writing, and then low words often creep in one's dull line. He says that a poet should not allow to leap the dull words in his poetry. Means he should be precise, he should be to the point. For as a needless Alexandrian ends, and then low words often creep into one's dull line, and a needless Alexandrine ends the songs that, like a wounded snake, drags its slow length along. Means he says that it should be more precise, otherwise the words of no use, irrelevant words automatically be creeping into the lines of the poetry. Then in the part 3 he says that nature is the chief masterpiece in writing well. Means Pope discusses that what critics should do, holding on the ancient as models, including Aristotle, who was respected by the lawless poets. How it is great that even at that time that there were not the laws of criticism, but still, even in modern times, still we have a respect, still we hold a merit for Aristotle. Therefore he says that for example, still we are going to read the Chaucer. Here he is going to say that nature creates its own chief masters. For example, Shakespeare is a chief master, John Milton is the chief masterpiece, and Homer, Virgil, these have been the nature's chief masterpieces in writing. So he says that we should have to focus on their writing, we should write well. The same is that the function of criticism, that the criticism should be well. And those chief masters of writing must be respected, but it never means that they should not be criticized. They should not be evaluated. The function of criticism is evaluation rather than the fault finding. So he says that the poets of a great value should be evaluated but with respect. Poets are race long, unconfined and free, still found and proud of savage liberty, received in his laws, and stood convinced that it was the fit, who conquered the nature, should preside over wit. That's the very beautiful line. That who stood convinced that he is the very fit man who conquered the nature and preside over the wit. So, Shakespeare, uh, Chaucer, as this is said that there is nothing beyond the Shakespeare. In any play of Shakespeare, there is the nature, there is the jealousy, there is the social life issues, every sociology, psychology, religion, civics, politics. That's everything is involved in the Shakespeare's in a single work. So uh, these are the some masters who have conquered the nature. They are the good masters of the nature. So they always preside over the wit. Shakespeare physically has died, but his fiction would never be going to end. So same should be the function of criticism. In these three parts he has I'm going to recapitulate that he is of the view that our critics should have developed a taste, and they should be more precise, and they should be knowing their limits, and they should have a great reading, and they should respect our ancients, and look and take care of our coming ones, poets and fiction writers as well. But they should be justified. They should have an understanding in their mind that those who are great or have been in great, they have a value, and they should not be just labeled as foolish on one's subjective judgments. So a critic should be of great taste, reading, and of judgment. These three parts, I'm using consciously these three words, that the critic should be of great taste, of great reading, and of great judgment. With this, we conclude our talk. Thank you very much.